Do not, for any reason, ever share your private keys, passphrases, passwords, or click suspicious links. Everyone all the time is trying to steal your stuff, so go slow and be careful. There's no point making all this money just to give it to a thief.
If you're an accredited investor and you want in on angel, seed round or early round equity and token opportunities in the artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency space, schedule an interview at nickblacknext.com. In life, you can either be really good, really lucky, or just be first. Being first is so much easier. Schedule a digital private client interview today at nickblacknext.com.
All right. Let me see. It doesn't look as glitchy as it did yesterday, but it still looks a little weird. Does it look like the background is in focus and nothing else? Isn't that weird? Be in focus. Be in focus. Auto. Oh, yeah. Good job, camera. All right. Let's see. Still a little slow. I think it's the 1080p stuff. Hello? 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 Question. Well, it's office hours. This is when we do questions. Would we expect to earn more token as token holders of HYPC? More than what? In the same way, but relative to other components such as license software, how does the splitting work for token holders? Dave, you can't ask like 7,000 hours worth of questions in one question. You got to pick one question, man. That's just being question greedy. You're question hoarding, man. So, but Dave, you can answer that question on your own. So just think through it. If I own hypercycle tokens and I put them in a pool, I will earn some reward, right? If I own hypercycle tokens and I've married them to a node license and I offer that up to somebody, I would earn the same or more. A or B, Dave. If I own the license and the hardware and the tokens, and I didn't need to give a percentage of that income to anyone else, would I earn the same, less, or more? Dave? Yeah, I mean, I hope you see the rhetorical and obvious nature of the answers to your many questions. Now, how does the splitting work? When you, and again, the network is not live, so none of this is happening right now, but once it goes live, your nodes, so just think of it from the node level. Think of it as like a little data center. That data center is rated like a coffee shop would be on Yelp. It's rated on compute, uptime, and reputation. And kind of like reputation is all encompassing, but each one of these has a score. It's like 1.26, 1.26, 1.26. And as they increase, or that's the relative ratio. And as they increase, when that total score becomes a 2, your node splits. Now, you would think, well, what would happen when a node would split? Well, if you have sufficient compute power, nothing. You just now have 2 nodes where you had 1. You're earning twice as much. And you're building reputation now on 2 nodes. However, you may be in a position where, let's say you had a data center and you had tons of nodes and tons of everything was working, but you were right at the edge of your compute abilities. If the nodes split, you would need to increase the compute, the equipment, the resources in order to handle that new level of compute, which would be twice as much. So the people that run facilities have that constant, they're still like, everybody else competing in the hardware side, where they're always doing upgrades. They're always iteratively increasing, grabbing new tech, new equipment. Oh, what's the lowest electricity consuming doodad that would let me process more transactions? So you got to think about it like that. Yeah. Okay. Nick, I was digital heavyweight. What's going on? Been gone for a while. Kenneth, buddy? Yes, there is no more digital heavyweights. Starting tomorrow, this show, the Monday, Wednesday, Friday show, it's Digital Investor. It will be only available. I think you'll be able to watch like 10 minutes of it, but it will only be available at Digital Investor, which is nickblacknext.com. You can see the website. That's it. You can just go right there and you click like the little join the show, and then you can do that, and then you get all access to all sorts of back end badassery. So that basically will be the show that takes over where Digital Heavyweights no longer exists. So there is that. Okay. Yay. Let's see. I think Brandon's at the gym. You just stuck with me today. Wah, wah. Question. So when it splits 10 times, you then have 100. No, man. You missed, you're off by a decimal. So let's go through this, Frank. Yes, you got it. Let's see. Howard says, just logged in. Just so that everyone knows that a node can split up to 10 times. The fastest it can happen is 6 months. The slowest it would probably happen is about 18 months. And it can split 10 times. And if a node with 1,024 hypercycle tokens split 10 times, you would have 1,024 individual nodes, each churning away, earning income, which is badass. Again, this is how it's supposed to work. It's not been turned on yet. We're not there yet. Tubi said when you buy one of the hypercycle boxes, it comes complete with like, no, he did not. He did not say that. You still have to get a license. You still have to inject the tokens. The box is just equipment. It doesn't come with a node license. Matter of fact, I don't even think legally they could do that. That'd make the box some kind of weird security thing or something. I think. I don't know. But no, it does not. Getting the hyper appliance or whatever they call it just gives you a sufficient piece of equipment that you can very easily log in with, connect some things. You could put a node license in there, marry the tokens. Those will be like just MetaMask transactions. It'll be very simple. It'll be just like click, 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 done. And then you'll be tilling. And then as compute workloads start being sold by Hypercycle, the company, they'll be distributed among the various nodes. And then as your computer is doing portions or fractions of some AI to AI compute workload, you'll be getting paid a nice little bit for that. Bam. I thought he said it can't, like, no. Still no. Howard, still no. So yeah, nope. Okay. Here we are. Quick housekeeping. Oh, well, we're going to talk about hyperinflation today. I bang the gong that we're not in any kind of inflationary environment. Not really. These are echoes from the supply shocks and the weird dislocations of COVID and the 2.1 trillion. Well, it was a lot more than that, wasn't it? Isn't it funny that in the $5 or $6 trillion that went out, now they just reference the 2 and change that went into consumers' hands? Wait a minute. So where'd the rest of the money go? Oh, that's right. Into a small handful of banks and insurance companies that sustained pre-COVID losses that we all just paid for because stimulus is robbing from the future and showering currency units on the right now with the assumption that maybe you'll get that back through taxes and future prosperity. Let's see, we got 60 people here. Okay, 2 things. Put some likes on there because this is the freebie show. This is the one that's going to keep going on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which is why you'll notice I don't talk about specific assets on the Tuesday, Thursday shows. We stay in the brain. So put a like on the video. Then I want you to write this phrase. Everybody that's here, and if you're watching this video after it's no longer live, I want you to type, "You cannot print prosperity." I want to see it at least 62 times, including that D-bag that always puts a down thumb on my. I had a video, a technical video explaining a technical thing, literally a technical thing, and someone thumbed down it. I'm like, how do you thumbs down math? And this is when you marginalize science and you marginalize intellect. This is what you get. Anyway, you cannot print prosperity. It's important to think about that because if you reduce all of the noise of what QE is and isn't, it is propaganda. It isn't real money. It isn't showering the now stimulus. If you take currency units and you shower them into the economy, you get a short-term weirdness, right? You get some buyer behavior that's weird because it's money that you didn't have. You get some short-term lending behavior, some free-flowing cash and credit availability. Then the vultures come in and the predatory lending comes out and and all the bad behavior comes back. The thing, like what we're seeing right now in the economy is the end of that. That 2.1, remember, the 2.1 that we saw, the rest of that money is with big banks and insurance companies to just basically put money in their back pocket for losses that they sustained before COVID that had nothing to do with COVID. But let's give them their $4 trillion of our future. Fine, done. Now, next step. So they shower us with little currency units. Our savings go up. People buy cars and TVs and steaks and a bunch of other stupid shit. And then what happens? Then you see all these weird markets getting hyper competitive for no other reason than just that they threw a bunch of money into the economy in a very short time period. Now, oddly, because we know that you cannot print prosperity, a bunch of companies don't understand this concept. And so they started hiring and they started building and they started borrowing because a couple of assholes at the Fed said that the economy was booming. Things are great. Like, wait a minute. You just turned the whole planet Earth off for 8 months for COVID. How is it that everything's good? I don't understand. Like, it's like they make a paper mache bridge over a pit of spikes. Go on, walk over it. I don't want to walk over that bridge. It is a crappy bridge. And every third person falls in and gets mutilated. So when you think about the asinine thinking, this obviously stupid thinking of companies that during COVID, not only did they overorder because they didn't have supply, which most supply managers probably understood this and they're like, well, what's the difference? Just keep ordering. Well, eventually those products come in. If you order 10 times the supply, when the supply chains work themselves out, guess what you get? 10 times what you get 10 times the supply. And then you have a bunch of crap sitting on shelves that you can't sell. And then you have to start marking things down. If you mark things down, you're making less money. If you're making less money, you're going to either hire less, you're going to cut down on workers' hours, you're going to do a variety of things. You're going to try to keep your employees as long as you can, that kind of labor hoarding effect. But at some point, you got to let them go. At some point, you have to be honest with yourself and go, oh, crap. Boy, were we stupid. And then what happens? Well, then you get to where we are now, where the money's gone. Personal savings have run out. People have to start paying rent again. People have to start paying their educational debt again, which is bad. That's like over $1.4 trillion worth of madness. We still got to pay the old people, right, for their Social Security and their Medicare and Medicaid and all these kind of things that they get. We will not get, but they get. So if you just very easily math this out, you go, oh God, this is a mess. And when the Federal Reserve, which is not the government, comes in and they say, we got to cool off this really hot market. Cool off what? It was a bullshit market. The way to look at it is go before COVID, right leading into COVID. That's the world that we're going back to. You got to leave all the COVID nonsense and you just got to squash it from your memory, because the stimulus was not continuous. They're not still sending you checks, right? The effects of quantitative tightening, they don't matter, because we're going to talk about kind of what a hyperinflationary environment would actually look like here in a little while. Because I do believe we could get there. We're just not there right now. Where we are right now is a messy version of kind of like 2019 leading into 2020. That's where we're at. Nothing's been fixed. Nothing's been solved. They haven't bailed out Social Security. They haven't fixed student debt. Credit card debt's at an all-time high. Credit card debt interest rates are at an all-time high. I mean, like closing in on 30%. Well, you think about that for a second. And I would hope that nobody here has not $1 of credit card debt. The best investment you can make is pay that shit off so that those vultures can't just like eat you alive. So we're back to 2019. The money's gone. The free checks are gone. Only now all these companies that were thinking with gloss-eyed stupidity that the world is going into some period of magical growth, they start going, oh, wait, crap. I guess that was not that. I guess there were supply chain dislocations. I guess this isn't actual inflation. This isn't the always and everywhere monetary currency unit showered on economy phenomenon, right? Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. You have to have continual, pervasive, persistent showering of currency units. Now, we don't have that yet, but we could have that. You say, well, would that be a U-turn? Well, not really. It'd be a UBI. So we're going to talk about like what UBI would look like, because I think it's important to think about. So as much as I am not in the inflation camp, certainly not in the Fed camp, and you guys understand, everybody here knows, this is not a secret, the Federal Reserve is no more federal than Taco Bell. The Board of Governors answers to the U.S., answers to the people, but those 12 private banks that make up the Federal Reserve, they are private banks with private investors. They do not disclose their assets. They do not disclose their balance sheet. They don't disclose much of anything. We know who some of the investors are, Jamie Dimon and the usual suspects, which is why it's no surprise that when banks collapse, guess where they end up? They're like, oh God, it's so dirty. When some of is it Republic, First Republic or whatever, Jamie Dimon was helping the government consulting for the FDIC. So he was consulting, helping figure out what was best for these regional banks when they get rolled up, when they just get absorbed into bigger banks. And then he went from being a consultant, which is weird because he was the one helping cut the bank up into pieces. He decided to recuse himself from being a consultant. He wanted to go ahead and absorb the bank. So he took off his consultant hat and he put on his asshole hat, and he said, well, we'll go ahead and we'll just take it. But you can't take it. That seems like cheating. No, it's not cheating. It's not cheating. It's just the way things work. So it's pretty clear that there is a desire among we'll call them the top tier banks the broker dealers that are directly working with the Federal Reserve. They have special accounts. They can basically do what they want. They have all sorts of protection. They're all too big to fail, all of them, at least until they're the only ones left. And then they will be just the right size to fail. But right now, all of these regional banks underneath they're having various degrees of trouble. Not all of them, but many of them, because they have very niche industries. And when we go into recession, you start to see people like hurting, and you start to see lines of credit closing, and you start to see fractures. And so as it seems rational and reasonable that these bigger banks and the Federal Reserve on top would love to see a continued bottoms-up collapse in the banking system. I mean, it's common sense. And that's not conspiracy. It's just go look at the list of bank failures in the last 20 years. Where did they end up? They don't take regional banks and melt them into other regional banks. They melt up. So it's just a big vacuum cleaner hoovering up banks and clients and oh God, the FDIC, what a mess. You know, they can just come in and shut your bank down, even if you're not insolvent. They can just make the claim and they can shut you down. It's crazy. There's all sorts of crazy things that the FDIC can do under the guise of like protecting the investor. And it's cool though that it always just seems to work out for the banks that are participants in those absorptions. Like, you know, when JP Morgan Chase does a deal and they end up getting the bank and a loss share agreement with the FDIC. Real quick, has anybody ever here voted to absorb and share the losses with JP Morgan Chase in any of the banks that they absorb? Anyone here voted on that? Said, yeah, you can have my future prosperity. You can take tax dollars. Matter of fact, you can increase taxes so that I can pay more taxes so that we can help absorb the losses that JP Morgan might get for absorbing that bank. So it's like, oh no, the taxpayer doesn't have anything to do with it. This is between the FDIC and the JP Morgan Chase. We're cool. Everything's fine. I don't understand why everything's fine though, because math. Where do you think they get the money for that? Oh, well, the Treasury gives them money for that. That's a Treasury function. Treasury, or, they get, no. What? Where does the Treasury get money? Well, they print it. Okay, cool. How do they print it? Well, they sell government debt against it. Okay, cool. What's government debt? Oh, it's borrowing from the future to pay for the right now. Right. So it is us. It is the taxpayers that get kicked in the nuts. These derivative one-off arguments are like, no, FDIC, that's between them and the Treasury and JP Morgan Chase. The taxpayer's not on the hook. Yeah, except that you're robbing from us indirectly. Well, not even indirectly, kind of obviously. No, and just people don't want to do that. It's not like we just did a lot of mental Olympics just then. It's only once removed. Like everything the Treasury does, that when they print into existence, they're doing it for the future. The Treasury doesn't grow crops. The Treasury's not like a for-profit business that's selling cars or solar panels and shit. The Treasury's not doing anything to earn money other than absorbing future prosperity, or even not even that, the promise of future prosperity. So stupid. Anyway, I don't mind that that's the way it works. I mind that that's the way they frame it. Because really all we're talking about is like the propaganda of governance, right? That's really what this is. So when you think of the Fed, it's a big political propaganda machine. You believe what they're saying because it's better than, it just takes so much effort to go and do all the work yourself. No one wants to go do the work. No one wants to go do the math. It's just easier to just listen to Steve Leisman's fat ass on CNBC squawk about the Fed and listen to Kramer smashing things and throwing toys across a weird studio and sometimes like becoming red-faced, remembering his old cocaine days and like, oh, bye. Oh, yeah, Kramer, man. Kramer. Come on, bro. So on the other side of it, I reduce all that because if we didn't have all of this stupidity, like especially financial kind of uneducation, then we wouldn't really have all the opportunities we have over like Joe Sixpack, who's getting his marching orders in a 5-minute blurb from CNBC once or twice a day when he's not trying to, have extramarital relations with his new secretary. Anyway, you can't print prosperity. Okay. Why I say all that? If we go into a world where AI eventually creates prosperity, which maybe, and very possibly, but the path to getting there is really what I'm focused on, because that's where we're all involved. Everybody here is involved in that path. And it's probably the last chance for us to do really good financially, because once we get on the other end of that and we're in a UBI environment where everybody's getting a basic income and everybody's indexing into everything and AI is managing money, well, it doesn't leave us a lot of opportunities. Not really. I mean, if the AI systems are smarter than we are, and they already are, and they are investing better than we are, and they're taking advantage of arbitrage opportunities and intellectual imbalances. So they're arbitraging currency units, markets, and opportunities. It doesn't leave us much left, meaning we could end up in a caste kind of environment, a caste system environment, where kind of like what you have when you enter that environment is pretty much what you've got forever. And all you can do is lose it and end up down in the bottom, in the dregs, with the other people that are looking up at the, proverbial cloud city. So it makes sense to do really good financially over the next, 18, 36 months, especially when it looks really bumpy and kind of cloudy. And in the interim, if we go into a UBI situation, there is the potential for like a massive hyperinflation or even a slow grind. Does anybody here know? I'm sure you do. 2%, if we had only 2% inflation, actual 2% currency inflation, currency units, not this bullshit the Fed does, but actual 2% new currency units showered onto the economy, 2% actual monetary inflation over a 20-year period. Do you know what the effect is on your buying power? So let's say you have $100,000 in the bank. 20 years later, at just 2%, and we all know it ain't 2%, but if it was just 2%, the Fed's target, like they can, anyway, in 20 years of 2% inflation, tell me the number. One of you will get it. What is your buying power from that $100,000? Anyone? I'll give you a hint. Sean nailed it. Half. Your $100,000, that's right, is worth about 50-ish K in buying power. Not zero, Don. Nothing can't go to zero. It can't be nothing. It could be near nothing if it was 20 years in Venezuela. So that's at 2%. And the effects of compound interest, they work in both directions. They work with you and they work against you. They work with you as a saver, as an investor. They work against you as a saver if you're not an investor, right? Because what do? You save and then you invest. And you hope that your investments beat the debasement in savings and your level of spending. So if you think of an environment where we have 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, 12, 17, 20%, all of a sudden it's not 20 years, it's 2 years. You think, wait a minute, what about these places that go into massive hyperinflation? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the mindset of it. So after that long, dithering diatribe, let me remind people real quick, we're at 327 of 1,000 total for Digital Investor. That means total members. We're not going over that because we think right now with a 2-man team, which is Brandon and myself, we don't think we can give the appropriate amount of value to what we want to do to more than about 1,000 people and more than about 100 digital private clients. So we have 327 of our 1,000 digital investors, which is cool. Thank you for those of you that are tomorrow, show number 1. And on the private client side, 49 was yesterday. So welcome to you if you're listening to number 49 of 100 private clients. Those are accredited investors. That's a separate thing. And that requires like an interview and all this kind of stuff. Okay. There's the housekeeping. We are good to go. We need to, school time, man. It's time for school. Class is in session.
Hello. You're late.
I don't know why that's so funny, but I love it.
You're bad at math, but I'm giving you an A+ in confidence.
Just doing what I gotta do.
Extra credit.
Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about inflation, but more on the side of hyperinflation. Now, I don't typically talk about hyperinflation. In my opinion, we're nowhere near it, but things are starting to change in a way that's made me have to really grapple with the potential reality of what universal basic income. So this is going to be a discussion about really understanding hyperinflation. Again, this is very simple. You don't need a book. Just sit back, relax, and we're going to put on our real world causes and effects, potential impact of universal basic income hat. Unlike the other hats that some of these other people wear. We will call it, for the sake of this conversation, we will call it the unpredictable, semi-predictable beast. And that is that of hyperinflation and its kind of real world impacts. So imagine you step onto, well, this is a battlefield, right? I mean, kind of. You're a student of game theory, so you're here to understand one of the most fearsome opponents that we might have to come into contact with. And that would be the beast that wreaks havoc on an economy. And that is actual inflation, always and everywhere, a monetary phenomenon kind of inflation. So I want everyone to write that. Always and everywhere, a monetary phenomenon. Okay, great. So I hope to see that like 4,000 times in the chat. All right. So when it grows out of control, it can transform into, when inflation permeates, it can enter, once it crosses some boundaries, hyperinflation. Inflation in its tamest form is a natural part of a healthy economy if you have the kind of inflation that's a reciprocal of expansion, investment in the future, hiring, free-flowing cash and credit, good animal spirits, entrepreneurship, these kinds of things. Its measurement, inflation, is at the rate at which the average price level of goods and services, backing out oil prices and politically motivated things, it's the price of those basic goods and services and the level at which they rise. A moderate amount of inflation indicates that economy is growing. That's why yield curves are typically sloping up and to the right. What happens when this thing gets too big too fast, though, is that it can kind of spiral out of control and it morphs into a very unpredictable, destructive kind of, you heard the label all over the place, hyperinflation. So as we dive into this hyperinflation concept, we need to explore the definition. So let's look at some real world examples, consider kind of what those outcomes were. I mean, the first thing that everyone should think of is like Venezuela, right? So, but we need to kind of dig in a little bit. So to speculate on what it might look like, if something like universal basic income became a reality in the United States, we do need to wrap our minds around what an inflationary inflation, right? Inflating the inflation rate to the point where it looks like hyperinflation and what that would do to buying power, things like that. So we have to understand inflation and hyperinflation, right? So at its core, inflation is that increase in general price level of goods and services in an economy over some period of time. You need to do this in years, not months or days, because those are typically supply chain dislocation, demand, supply side, small imbalances. but you need to look on the timeline of many years. When prices rise, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. That makes sense, right? A candy bar that cost a nickel in the 1950s costs $1 today, then economists might measure inflation as that annual percentage rate increase of that candy bar, right? So hyperinflation is when inflation, you remember Girls Gone Wild? Well, hyperinflation is like the Girls Gone Wild of inflation, except not on a bus. It's not just high inflation, but it's an extraordinarily high, typically accelerating inflation. So inflation in the inflation rate. And while not all economists, if you ask like 6 people, you're going to get like 6 different answers. They don't, the inflation threshold. Typically, the common definition is an inflation rate of over 50% month on month, which that is insane if you think about it. So at this rate, a loaf of bread that costs $1 today would be $130 a year from now, which is expensive bread. You're only going to get that in like Beverly Hills. And that is actually the price per piece of bread in Beverly Hills restaurants for whatever reason. But that's not hyperinflation. That's just douchebaggery. Anyway, hyperinflation is pretty rare. But oddly, it is a normal, usually ending outcome of government-produced currencies. It's kind of funny. And that's why currencies they have a shelf life of about 50 to 60 years, and then they typically go away. Obviously, we're in a little bit different environment now, but I'm not going to say this time is different because this time is never different. Anyway, hyperinflation is pretty rare, but it can be quite devastating because it punishes savers. First of all, it destroys savings, disrupts economic planning. It can lead to significant social and political upheaval. I mean, if you've been saving your whole life, you would think that you'd be safe, right? Okay, I packed away $100 grand, $200 grand, $1 million, $3 million. I'm good. No, you're not, because 6 months to a year, even contained hyperinflation destroys your savings. See you later, bye, gone, right? So some examples, you can look to Germany, like the Weimar Republic. You can look at Zimbabwe, obviously Venezuela. And these are the three examples of hyperinflations that most people kind of call back on because they're so obvious and in your face examples. Now, there are lesser examples of still hyperinflationary environments. Like I know Turkey's not having a good time right now. There's places you can look right now where you'll see this, but the most famous example of hyperinflation, probably, I think if you ask everyone, not only just economists, but like everyone, would be Germany right after World War I. So the German government printed money to pay for the war, right? And by about 1923, the situation had spiraled out of control. And at its peak, prices were doubling just shy of 4 days, every 3.7 days, prices were doubling. I want you to think about that for a second. Everything that you buy every 4 days, twice a week almost, not only is it doubled, but it's quadrupled every week. Everything that you buy, all of it. So the German mark, obviously at that point, their currency unit was worthless, and people were literally using it as wallpaper and kindling, like burning it for heat. So there's, a pretty obvious example, right? Let's talk about Zimbabwe. Do you guys remember those signs people would hold up, like Zimbabwe billionaire needs help? They had like $1 billion bills and stuff. Anyway, in the early 2000s, the government under Robert Mugabe began seizing land from white farmers to redistribute to black farmers. Okay. We're not going to get into all that. But this is what happened. The policy led to collapse in agricultural production. Why? Well, because these people that for many generations had been farming were booted off their farms, and they took people that had no experience in agriculture or farming, and they said, here's your farm. Surprise, surprise. That didn't work out. Anyway, the government responded by printing more money. At its height in 2008, it's not that long ago, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was 89.7 sextillion% per month. As a matter of fact, I want people to write that in the chat just so that you can say you wrote the word sextillion. It's fun. It's a fun word. It's fun to say. 89.7 sextillion% per month. Obviously, we got to talk about Venezuela. So in more recent years, Venezuela was grappling with hyperinflation. The country's reliance on oil exports combined with really poor economic policy and just like the political instability of like the Chavez times led to an economic collapse. It's very obvious. In 2018, prices in Venezuela were doubling about every 19 days. Every 19 days. That is, I forget how many millions their inflation rate was, but like, I remember this story that if you took 100 million US dollars, this is the most, this should let you know where things can go. 100 million US dollars. You have 100 million bucks, bro, you rich. I don't care what anyone says. You're wealthy if you have $100 million. So you got rich, you sold your company in the US, you were a .com dude, you got 100 million bucks. You know what you did? You went to Venezuela and you said, I'm going to put it in a Venezuelan bank. We'll just trade it for whatever the equivalent is of bolivars. In 2013, by 2020, this is 7 years later, do you know what that 100 million US dollars, do you know what the US dollar equivalent would be now? This is a good one. 13 bucks, bro. Your 100 million US dollars converted into bolivars and simply converted back is worth 13 bucks. No, not 100. Cisco, you can't, you might not even be able to afford the ride back from the airport because you're poor now. Because hyperinflation. Anyway, and so you think, God, if I had been a saver, imagine having done all of that and just to see it all get nuked in 7 or 8 years. Now, oddly enough, people point to the Venezuelan stock market. They go, look how good the stock market did. Yeah, because things were priced in funny money bullshit currency. So if the currency depegs and gets all nasty, of course it makes other assets look like they're going sky high. But it's all a game. It's a confidence scam because the currency can't buy anything and it's devaluing so quickly that you get stuck. You get stuck in a variety of assets. You're like, well, I don't ever want to come back to the currency. And that's what happens is people flee the currency. And as people flee the currency, they're much less willing to take the currency in payment for goods and services. It becomes less and less money. And what is money? Money is that which extinguishes debt. If it no longer extinguishes debt, it's no longer money. Isn't that crazy? So what kind of fallout do you see? Well, it's more than just economic problems. It has a bunch of like wide-ranging social and political issues. In Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela, hyperinflation led to extreme poverty, food shortages, political instability, assassinations, and secret police, and all this kind of shit. It wiped out people's savings, making it impossible for them to plan for the future. And in each case, the government eventually had to abandon its currency and just hit the reset switch. So these are examples that show you kind of how difficult it can be to stop hyperinflation once it starts. Because the leaders of those regimes, typically, they print, they buy stuff, and they lie until they get caught. And then they flee with a whole bunch of assets that they bought pre-inflation. Right? That's why the behavior of the Nancy Pelosi's and the Jerome Powell's and these officials that trade on insider information pre-inflation, and then they just gobble up assets before we get that really grinds my gears. And then that's a whole other thing. Anyway, whatever. It's no different. It's just that they don't run governments, or maybe they do. I don't know. Enough people believe Jerome's dumbass. Maybe he does. Who knows? Anyway, but it can be very difficult to stop hyperinflation once it gets going. And, you know, in order for good governance, I believe you need trust in a currency, right? And you need to restore that trust in the currency. And usually they just hit the reset switch. And that requires major economic reform, right? It requires a lot of political change. People are not usually willing to absorb periods of austerity. No one likes that. No one likes austerity. It's like, no, let's keep printing stuff and doing it and just showering the economy with money. I don't want to do anything. So ultimately, hyperinflation is a very destructive force. It leaves a country's economy in ruin. And then you think, okay, but that's not here. That's not in the United States. Yes, that is true. That is not here. But at whatever the real rate is of inflation right now, probably the number is between 4 and 5 admitted. And the real rate, if you looked at currency debasement, the things that we can't see, there's like shadow figures that say we're in the 7s and 8s. And that's not hyperinflation, but it's also not so good. So do your math again on 7%. It looks way worse than 2%. So now you're at about 7, 8 years and your money's been cut in half. So you say, wow, that would change the way you looked at the future. That would change the way that you thought about saving. Because right now, I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of holding US dollars that I know they're either going to get nuked now or at some point they are. And I'm not like a hyperinflation like, oh, I'm going to take my gold and go live in a bunker and all this whole bullshit. But, at some point, you want to put your assets, your currency units in a place where they at least maintain your purchasing power, right? You have to maintain first. Like you have to tread water before you can swim. You have to just not drown. So hyperinflation can leave an economy in total ruin. And you think, okay, can a hyperinflation happen? Let's say we're at this 5 to 7 rate right now, the actual, right? So how would we get to 50 month on month? We're at 7. Let's just say 7 year on year. That's a big difference between 50% month on month, right? That'd be a lot. So, could universal basic income trigger hyperinflation? So universal basic income, really quick for those of you that maybe you've heard the term, but you're not familiar. It's a policy where every citizen would receive a set amount of money from the government. No strings attached. Already sounds good, doesn't it? It's a way to alleviate poverty and provide a safety net in a kind of an ever-changing economy, especially one that may be driven technologically by artificial intelligence, AI softwares as we make this transition, this march towards AGI, swarm AI, or like digital intelligence. Okay. So the idea that we could alleviate poverty and create this big safety net for all these people that are getting displaced, that sounds good. Yes, I don't want people to be, net, sad, and poor. That sucks. But you can't print prosperity. So until we get to the point where AI softwares and all this tech and life and longevity are being extended as a result of, artificial general intelligence, some kind of benevolent, beneficial AGI, until we get there, we're in the print a bunch of money, give it to a bunch of people, see what happens phase. Well, we saw what happened. Look how fucked up the economy got in 2021. Look at all the bad behavior, not just in the crypto space where it was really bad, but just look everywhere. Look at all of the weird gambling, meme coin, just really bad governance, criminal activity that spawned as a result of 2021. If there's no 2021, there's no FTX. There's no Three Rivers. There's no Celsius. None of these douchebag assholes would have ever gotten off the ground. On the other side of it, all that stupid money floating around exposed them for the crooks for which they were. So I guess on that sense, that's good, but don't worry, there'll be a whole new batch of crooks that come in to siphon off money from the lesser intellectual individuals that are getting their free money. Because if you're just sitting at home and you're getting a check, you're going to go punt it. Most people are going to go gamble it because enough is never enough, right? So, could this lead to inflation or hyperinflation? So that's kind of where my brain's at. Is I think it could. I don't know that the answer is clear cut, but to me, it seems pretty obvious. Like at the very least, we're going to get behavior that looks a lot like 2021, which was just peak cryptarded. I'm thinking just in the crypto space, but this is going to be everywhere. I mean, really think about all the bad behavior and the unwinds in 2021 and 2022. Think of all the criminal activity and the scams and this. It was a very not good time, and it brought out just like the worst human financial behavior. So while the answer is maybe not clear cut, if the government simply prints more money to fund UBI, which what other policy do they have? Where else are they going to get it? Again, the government doesn't run farms. They're not selling widgets. They're not doing anything profitable. So taxes and shifting funds from other programs. That's it. That's where you get it. So what is taxes? Shifting prosperity from the future to the now, robbing future prosperity, printing prosperity. So, it might not have hyperinflationary effects, but it sure seems like it will have massive inflationary effects and inflation on inflation rate. Hyperinflation in the United States it does seem unlikely that 50% month on month. So I'm not going that far. But given, we do have strong institutions and, while I don't think they're experienced in managing inflation because I don't think you can manage inflation, I think economies and cycles are what manage inflation. But there is at least a lot of belief that our level of governance is sufficient where they might, hopefully think this through. But that's a very rose-tinted view of U.S. financial governance, which is mostly just bullshit and guessing and voodoo. So while hyperinflation to me seems unlikely, even very stable economies need to very carefully manage their monetary policy and their fiscal policy, taxing and spending, and be mindful of the potential dangers of uncontrolled inflation. And if you let these dudes just start printing money and handing it out to people because they've been displaced from the economy, A, you have to do it, and B, you can't do it. And that's the unstoppable force versus the immovable object, right? So long story short, kind of conclusion, we are all students of game theory. So we know that every action that we take and that that the other entity takes, the players in the game, they all have consequences, right? So in the game of economics, which is the one that we're playing right now, this inflation monster has to be carefully managed to preventing it kind of from morphing from what it is now, which is quietly destructive, to being outright nuclear destructive and reaching something that looks like hyperinflation. And while hyperinflation, again, which we will call 50% month on month, it is a very rare occurrence. But when it happens, you do not come back from it. There's no coming back. I mean, eventually the government still exists. But as far as that currency unit is concerned, the currency itself doesn't come back. Germany's currency didn't come back. They had to hit the reset switch. Zimbabwe's currency never came back. Reset switch. Venezuela is still getting nuked as we speak. I mean, there's just currency units as like lining the streets. It's just trash. So as you consider what the future might look like and what policies like universal basic income might look like, you have to be mindful that what look like kind of not simple, but palpable or kind of palatable inflationary effects of this kind of like, say, 5 to 7E range, those effects can be managed psychologically. And I don't think that there's really any monetary management of inflation, but I do think that we can cognitively think our way through that. We can be like, okay, cool. So I know that my money's no good. I'm losing 7% a year. If I'm losing 7%, I got to make 7 to break even. So if I got to make 7 to break even, and yet I know that anything over 6 should send up a red flag, I have to be spot on with my assumptions, spot on with my game theory, spot on with my investments. So I guess to reduce all this, you've got to be good. and you get good through practice, you get good through training, but you have to keep your like intellectual swords sharp, because if the inflation, creepy uncle inflation turns into like monster inflation, then we're in a really bad spot. That's kind of where my head's at, as inflation may or may not turn to something a lot less manageable. And there we are. I'm freezing again. I don't know why that happens. Anyway, let's call today. Stay in school. Don't do drugs. Don't do anything my poor insolvent drunk, strung out on meth grandmother would not do, which is very little. We will see you tomorrow for the very first episode of Digital Investor, which should be quite fun. I think we'll have like the first 15 minutes of it on, and then it'll go dark. And then we will be in Digital Investor land. So see you soon.
Of all the uneducated noise you're getting from the droves of YOLO meme coin peddling douchebag gurus out there trying to use you as their exit liquidity? Would you rather learn a competent university level set of skills that will guide you in managing and investing for the rest of your life? Join us 3 days a week at Digital Investor. Develop your knowledge of game theory, cognitive bias, macroeconomics, monetary theory, investment theory, psychology of the crowds, and more. For more info on Digital Investor and how it can help you, reach out at nickblacknext.com. Are you tired?